Now in this next section, we need to talk about how the revolution really got started. And so in the last video, we talked about the Estates General, and so I think it's important to understand how this works. The Estates General is made up of the three different class groups, and each estate receives one vote. Doesn't matter how big your estate is. So go back to the graphic that we mentioned last time and how we have the third estate with 96% of the people, and yet they only get one vote. And two votes can override the third. And so if you have the first and the second who are always working together, the third estate is always going to be left out. And that's why there's no real decisions that can be made to help out the third estate. It's always going to be heavy in favor of the first and the second. So that's why in this first meeting, there's really nothing that is decided, because the second estate, who wants the taxes to be taken off of them, is not going to be able to get anything moving forward without the agreement of the first and the third. Well, the third estate's not going to be happy with taxes being removed from the second estate and not from them, and so the third estate's certainly not going to vote for it, and so we've got this stalemate, and nothing is being decided there. And so there is another meeting that is called here, and this is the National Assembly. So throughout the Middle Ages, the clergy and nobility had dominated most of the government aspects. Go back to feudalism, and that's how that worked. And so they thought that they were going to be able to take charge in this situation as well, and that the third estate would just kind of stand by and nod their heads in agreement. However, the third estate was mostly of the bourgeoisie, and they insisted that they all meet, but every representative gets a vote. Not every estate, every representative. And so that means if we've got 100 people, then the first estate's going to get one vote, the second estate probably gets 2, maybe 3, and the third estate gets 96 votes. And it comes to this major stalemate between them and disagreement where none of them are able to come to a conclusion because of the fact that the third estate wants to have more representation. They want to have a say in what happens. So they go to the king, and they ask the king, hey, Mr. King, how should we do this? And the king decides that he is going to side with the nobility, and he is going to order them to follow all of the medieval rules that they had once done. And so you have 96% of the people who are now enraged at the king and upset because now they believe that their power is being taken away from them, or that they have no way to progress into their society. And so a man by the name of Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, I will spell his name so you can add him to your notes here. Sieyès is spelled S-I-E-Y-E-S. He made a suggestion. He said that they should create a national assembly that would allow the common people to pass their own laws. And so that is where we are at here on this screen. We've got the National Assembly being called by Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès. This is a third estate meeting only, because of the fact that the first and the second don't show up. They don't recognize it as being an official meeting. And so when the third estate shows up for this assembly, they're wondering where's first and second estate. And yet the first and second estate didn't want to have any association with them. They went to the king. They kind of tattled and told the king what's going on. So Louis comes in, and Louis decides that he is going to call a meeting of the Estates General, but he is going to lock the doors and keep the third estate out. And so when the third estate tries to come in and tries to join up with this meeting with the king and the first and the second estate, they have nowhere to go. So they're looking for any place that they can meet, any place that's open in the government building, and they find an open tennis court. And so when they go into that tennis court, they meet there, and they pledge that they are not going to leave until they have a new constitution established. And this becomes known as the Tennis Court Oath. And of course, as you can imagine, tensions are high now between the third estate members and the king and the first and the second estate. And you've got this massive buildup that is a potential for some sort of escalation in the battle, escalation in the political system, and all they need is a spark to get it going. And that's where this comes in. This is the Bastille. And the tensions have been rising. The king, the queen, and many of the government officials, they all go to Paris because of the fact that the lower class, the third estate, are now uprising. They are angry, they are upset, they're storming the streets. And so it forces all of the government officials to leave town to go to Paris. And in July of 1789, they stormed the Bastille. That is one of the most famous elements of this. You may have heard of that term, storming the Bastille, but it's important to understand why that happened and understand what's so important about the Bastille itself. The Bastille is actually a prison. Well, why in the world do they want to go to a prison? Why did they want to break people out? Didn't they have enough people to fight in their army? Yeah, they did. But the Bastille was not only a prison, it was also a storage place for weapons and ammunition. And it was also a symbol of royal power. And so when the peasants come in and they overtake the Bastille, it was symbolic of them overtaking the government itself and becoming more powerful where the government couldn't stop them. And then they took a few guns and ammunition along the way to help them fuel their revolt. So here's a question for you to consider. Based on what you've learned about the Enlightenment already and how that applies to government, do you think that these radicals have a biblical right to overthrow their government if they're not satisfied? Do you think that the Bible could support this? I want you to think through that, and I want you to write something down in your notes and be prepared to defend it. Either take the side of, yes, I could find something in Scripture, I could find a principle, I could find an idea of Scripture, of a biblical worldview that would say, yes, this is something that I think that I could defend using Scripture. Or take the side that says, no, there's really no biblical grounds for this. There's no reason that they had the right to overthrow their government. And I want you to take a position. I want you to tell me why. Now, here are a few more reforms that begin to happen in France. We have the Legislative Assembly, which has the power to create laws, but the king still has executive power here. And there are limitations that are put on the king, including things like checks and balances. This goes back to Montesquieu and his Enlightenment ideas. And so when the new Legislative Assembly is going to be created in France, it's going to make sure that the king has to answer to a legislative group of people. We also mentioned the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of Citizen. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. That comes out of that Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Also, the idea of liberty, property, security, resistance to oppression. That comes out of there, and hopefully that sounds familiar.